Good morning and welcome to this, the 23rd meeting of 2013 of the European and External Relations Committee. Can I make the usual request that mobile phones are switched off? Can I welcome again to her seat Patricia Ferguson and convey apologies from Jamie McGrigor and send him our best wishes. And welcome Gavin Brown, who is substituting today for Jamie McGrigor. And Gavin, could I ask you to make a declaration of interest?
Sure. Nothing to declare, Convener.
Thank you very much. And can also welcome the advisor to the committee, Dr Daniel Keneally, who will be the advisor on the Scotland's Government's White Paper relating to the European Union. Welcome to committee, Dan. The first agenda item is a decision to take agenda item 6 in private. It's our paper to discuss the remit and future plans for our inquiry. Is members agreeable to that? Okay, thank you very much. The second agenda item is the Scottish Government's White Paper on Independence, and today we have an evidence session with the Deputy First Minister and her officials this morning. So can I say welcome to the Deputy First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, Russell Bain, who's the interim head, and Miranda McIntosh, who is the Senior Policy Executive of External Affairs Policy Team, Scottish Government. Can I welcome you all to committee this morning? We're delighted to have you here. And I think, Deputy First Minister, do you have a brief opening statement?
Yes, I'm grateful to the committee for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I want to just briefly outline the key points on international relations as laid out in Scotland's future, and then I'm of course happy to answer your questions. The International Relations and Defence chapter of Scotland's Future sets out the key issues, but there are also important related sections on security and intelligence, immigration, citizenship and passports contained in the chapter on justice, security and home affairs. There are also, of course, links to how an independent Scotland would approach economic and trade policy, how we would secure the health and well-being of Scots, the continuing importance of international students in our higher education system, and our broad approach to environmental policy. Scotland's future makes clear independence would mean that Scotland's interests will be directly represented internationally for the first time in 300 years. Scotland's future not only sets out how we could do this, but also why it is better for all of us if decisions on international policies are taken for Scotland in Scotland. Independence presents an important opportunity to put Scotland's interests first at all times. This opportunity is important because the choices that an independent Scotland makes internationally will have a significant impact on our economy, our society and on our people. Almost 200 countries around the world take this opportunity for granted. Many of these countries are smaller or indeed less fortunate in terms of natural resources than Scotland. Some don't have the advanced institutions in civic society, education or in governance that Scotland does. So I think one of the most important messages that Scotland's future communicates is that Scotland would be well able not only to participate but to thrive internationally. It explains how we will take our place in the international community. It outlines the structure of an initial diplomatic network and highlights the international institutions within which we would participate as an independent country. Of course, one of the most important of these institutions is the European Union. Scotland's future therefore sets out a suitable legal route to facilitate a transition to independent Scottish membership of the EU. And we've also set out clearly our intentions as regards membership of a range of other organisations, including the UN, NATO, the World Trade Organisation, the Council of Europe and the Commonwealth. At present, we have no formal voice in any of these institutions, and we're represented by a Westminster government that understandably bases its actions often on different international priorities. However, I want to stress today that our prospectus for independence doesn't rest on how many embassies we would have or which international organisations we would continue membership of. Instead, we want to focus on what we would have the opportunity to achieve with the powers that independence brings. So our priorities are clearly set out in Scotland's future. They're based around a clear framework of participating in rules-based international cooperation, protecting Scotland's people and resources and promoting sustainable economic growth. That framework, we believe, would enable us to deliver a set of policies focused on our national interests and in accordance with our priorities. The White Paper explains clearly that an independent Scotland would be positioned as a country which observes international law and respects and promotes human rights, democratic values, equality and good governance. We've got some unique advantages and experiences to offer in the field of climate change and energy, and we've shown that we can innovate through our approach to international development and aid. So Scotland's Future makes the case for a set of strong new relationships with the other nations of these islands, with our European, Nordic and Atlantic neighbours, and with the wider global community. So in short, Convener, I think it sets out a vision of how an independent Scotland would operate constructively and cooperatively in the community of nations. I think that's a compelling vision, and one that I'm happy to answer your questions on.
Thank you very much, Deputy First Minister. Last week we heard evidence from Professor Stephen Tierney and Professor Michael Keatings, who had suggested that one of the key aspects and one of the unique aspects of the proposal for an independent Scotland is the Edinburgh Agreement. And I'm wondering if you can tell me, how significant the Edinburgh Agreement is in taking forward our place within, Scotland's place within the international organisations that you've just mentioned.
I think the Edinburgh Agreement is very significant. I also think it's a real credit to both the Scottish Government and indeed the UK Government. I saw, I think Michael Keating, or perhaps it was one of the other witnesses last week, describe it as almost unique in the sense that two governments were able to come together, two governments with very differing views on the constitutional future of Scotland, but nevertheless agree in a very constructive manner how the people of Scotland should be given the opportunity to make the decision about their own future. So I think it is a shining example internationally of how these things should be done. Clearly the significance of the Edinburgh Agreement first and foremost is that it paved the way for the legislation that has now been passed by Parliament to govern the referendum. But secondly, it was significant because of the commitment contained in Article 30 of the Edinburgh Agreement, which both governments signed up to, saying that we would respect the outcome of the referendum and that we would operate constructively in light of the outcome of the referendum, whatever it might be, to best represent both the people of Scotland and the people of the rest of the United Kingdom. And I think that's a really important commitment. I mean, I say this often, and I think it is absolutely the case that we are engaged right now in a very passionate debate about the future of Scotland that will lead to both the Scottish Government and those who support independence arguing their case passionately, and it will lead to those in the United Kingdom Government and those who oppose independence arguing their case equally passionately, and that will lead to things being said, positions being taken. But once the people of Scotland decide, once they have expressed their democratic will, and if that is to vote yes for Scotland to become an independent country, then there will be an overwhelming shared mutual interest on the part of the Scottish Government and the UK Government to work together cooperatively and constructively to implement that decision and to do so in the interest not just of the Scottish people but of the people of the rest of the UK. So I think it is impossible really to overstate the significance and the importance of the Edinburgh Agreement.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy to go to open questions. Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Deputy First Minister. The Edinburgh Agreement seems to be key to a lot of the way forward at this stage. And in earlier this year, Maris Sefcovic, the Vice President of the European Commission, wrote to you, and in that said, the European Commission has not commented on any specific situation in relation to any member state and will continue to refrain from doing so. The European Commission would only be able to express its opinion on legal consequences under EU law of a specific situation upon the request of a member state detailing a precise scenario. Given that there is such detail in the white paper about using Article 48 to actually achieve Scotland's membership post-independence, do you think the Edinburgh Agreement now puts any pressure to actually put these scenarios to the Commission prior to the referendum to clarify the situation?
I think the Edinburgh Agreement arguably paves the way for that, but I think the position of the Commission and the obligation, I think, on both the Scottish and the UK Government to provide as much clarity as we can about the choice facing the Scottish people means that common sense dictates that we should go to the European Commission jointly with the scenario that the Scottish Government has laid out in the White Paper and take up their invitation to comment on that precise scenario. I've made clear, the First Minister has made clear, that the Scottish Government stands ready to do that. We're keen to do that. We'll do that tomorrow if the UK Government is willing to do so. I don't see any reason why that can't be done so that we can have a debate about Europe in the context of the opinion that the European Commission would then give us, because it's been very clear it will only do that upon being asked to do that by a member state. And right now the member state is the UK government. So I'll repeat that invitation to the UK government today. We've laid out a precise scenario, what we think is a valid legal route for Scotland to make the transition from being a member of the EU as part of the UK to being a member of the EU as an independent country, and to make that transition smoothly and with no break in membership of the European Union. So by all means, let's go to the European Commission and ask them what their view of that legal route is.
Any other questions from members? Gavin Brown.
In relation to Article 48, to which you've just referred, when did the Scottish Government reach its view that Article 48 was the appropriate route?
Well, we reached that view in the process of drawing up and developing the White Paper, as has been said previously, before the White Paper was published, and has been said since then. That is consistent with the legal advice we have received. So we consider, well, I would make 2 points. Firstly, and the White Paper is explicit on this, it will ultimately be for the European Union to decide what the appropriate route for that transition to take place will be. But we think Article 48 is a valid and sensible route to take. It's a route that would recognise that Scotland is currently in the European Union. Our citizens are citizens of the European Union. We already comply with the body of law that governs the European Union. It is a route that would lead to amendment of the treaties. We think it's valid. I noted your witnesses last week seemed to agree that it was a plausible route to take. So we've come to that view based on those considerations.
Who outside of the Scottish Government has said that they feel Article 48 is the appropriate legal route?
Well, I noticed one of your witnesses, I can't remember, I think it was Stephen Tierney last week, described it as plausible. I think we've seen people like Sir David Edward, former judge of the European Court, make comments, perhaps not specifically about Article 48, but make comments about the fact that there would be obligations on the European Union to negotiate in good faith. Now, I'm prepared to have debates with whoever wants to have these debates about the particular legal route that might be appropriate to take. I think on any objective reading of the treaties, Article 48 is a sensible, to use the word that was quoted last week, plausible and valid route by which Scotland can make that transition. I think the case for that is very strong. I think the case for that is overwhelming.
You say it's overwhelming. Other than the witness who gave evidence to this committee last week, who has said specifically, outside of the Scottish Government, that Article 48 would be the correct legal route?
I would put that back and say who outside the Scottish Government has said that it wouldn't be a valid legal route. Now, I'm happy to debate this with anybody. I think it's a legal route. I haven't heard an argument from anybody that would be remotely convincing that says it's not a plausible legal route. The White Paper is explicit in saying that ultimately it's for the European Union to determine what the best legal route would be, but this is the one that I think on any objective reading of the treaties would seem to lend itself to Scotland's situation.
But just for clarity though, because you want to put it back to me, but obviously it's you who is giving evidence here today and not me. Are we clear that the only person you can say outside of the Scottish Government who has said categorically that Article 48 would be the correct legal route would be a witness who gave evidence to this committee last week?
No, I'm saying that I haven't heard anybody make a convincing case that Article 48 wouldn't be an appropriate legal route. And, if you want to make that case, I'd be happy to hear it and I'd be happy to debate it with you. But I haven't heard anybody take serious legal issue with the fact that that would be a valid legal route to take.
Yes, but I'm sure we will debate it in due course. But who has said that it is?
Well,
You're saying it's overwhelming.
I am saying that it is. We have published a white paper consistent with advice, legal advice from our law officers, as we said we would. I haven't heard anybody, albeit that there will be people who say that they don't think Scotland should or would or whatever be a member of the European Union. I haven't heard anybody make a compelling case that says Article 48 would not be a valid legal route to take. Now, if you want to quote people saying that, I'm happy to engage in that debate. But, you know, or if you want to tell me why you think it wouldn't be a valid legal route, by all means do that and we can have that debate.
Okay. In relation to timing then, under that article, part of that article says that amendments enter into force after being ratified by all the member states in accordance with their respective constitutional requirements. How many of the members would have to have a referendum, and what are the constitutional requirements of each of the existing members?
There's never been, I mean, if you're talking about traditional accession to the European Union, which I would argue Scotland wouldn't be in, then to the best of my knowledge, the ratification process has never been difficult, it's never been controversial, it's never been blocked by any member state, and it's never occasioned a referendum in any member state. So I don't consider that would be required for Scotland either, given even if we were in a traditional accession situation, which we're not because of the situation we've laid down with Article 48.
Have you done an audit, though, of the constitutional requirements of the existing members of the European Union to see what processes they would have to go through and the timescale that it might take for all of them to ratify? Well,
obviously the particular constitutional arrangements of each member state is a matter for them. What I'm saying to you, and I'm saying to you very clearly, in the history of the European Union, treaty ratification to confirm EU membership, and we're talking here traditional full-blown Article 49 accession, has never failed, it's never been controversial, it's never triggered a referendum in any member state. So, you know, if that's the case in the entire history of the European Union, then again, if you want to put to me some evidence that the situation in Scotland would be different, then I'm happy to engage with that. But as far as I'm aware, you're not putting that evidence to me.
But my question to you was, have you, as a government, looked at the constitutional requirements and the ratification processes of all of the 27 member states to ensure that all of them would be able to do it within 18 months?
Of course, we look at all matters like that, and that has led us to the statement that I've just made to you. In the history of the European Union, treaty ratification to confirm European Union membership has never been controversial or triggered a referendum in member states. So, you know, all of the work that we've done around this has led us to that belief. Now, you know, I could also point to precedents which would suggest that, suggest overwhelmingly that the European Union, which, let's remember, is an organisation that's instinct and raison d'etre, if you like, is enlargement to try to expand its territory, it has operated in a pragmatic and flexible way. It's not a direct analogy, I'm not suggesting that it is, but when you consider as an example the position of the former East Germany on German unification, the European Union operated pragmatically and flexibly to allow the territory of East Germany in a very, very, very short space of time to become fully part of the European Union. I recall reading a Commission press release that was issued extolling the virtue of the European Union behaving in a way that was inherently pragmatic and flexible. Now, you know, Scotland is already a member, albeit by virtue of being a member of the UK, of the European Union. We've complied with the body of European law for 40 years. Our citizens are European citizens. We have, you know, something like 160,000 citizens of other European member states living here. The idea that you seem to be putting to me, or that opponents of independence put to me about independence, is that somehow Scotland wouldn't be welcome as a member. I just find that incredible.
I didn't suggest Scotland would be welcome as a member at all. Forgive me for pursuing this point, but I do feel the Deputy First Minister hasn't answered my specific question. Has the Scottish Government conducted an audit of the constitutional requirements of the 27 existing member states, and also in relation to the timescales that they would have to fulfil. Have you done that work? Can you say you've done it?
The Scottish Government, of course, looks at the particular requirements of member states in terms of what they would require to do. We're not in a situation that the treaties provide for expressly. There is nothing in any of the treaties that cover the situation of part of an existing member state becoming independent. So you cannot look at the treaties and find the absolute circumstances that would apply there. But we have, to answer your question, we have looked at various different circumstances and scenarios, which has led us to the conclusion that I have now stated on a number of occasions for you. And unless you want to put to me some specific reason why that is wrong, then that is the conclusion we've reached. There has never been an example when we've been talking about states that are outside the European Union acceding to European Union membership where the ratification process has resulted in any difficulty.
I think I'll leave it there. I don't think we're making progress, so I'm content to.
Campbell with a supplementary.
Yes. Morning, Cabinet Secretary. I'm just looking at Professor Tierney's evidence from last week. He did tell us last week that it was his view that there was not a clear set of articles we can point to for admission for such occasion. He was referring to Scotland's accession, which is the point you've just been making. He also said that, having looked at Article 48 and 49, that he didn't see a particular legal problem. But he did say, I imagine if the political will existed, the process could be fairly smooth. Would you like to comment on that?
I agree with that. And, I think the kind of real world intervenes in what can sometimes be or sometimes sound like a very academic legal argument. I think with political will, and I think there would be political will if Scotland democratically votes for independence, for Scotland to continue to be a member of the European Union, then that process can happen quickly, and it can, and I believe it will happen smoothly. I've already cited the not direct precedent, but nevertheless a situation with the former East Germany, where you were talking about a territory that wasn't already in the European Union that very, very quickly became part of the European Union. We're talking here about Scotland with about a country that has complied with the body of European law for many years. And I think with the political will which would be there, given all of the consequences that would arise not just for Scotland but for other member states of Scotland not being in the European Union, then yes, I do agree that that would could be, and I would suggest will be, a smooth process.
Thank you. Could I ask another question, not directly related? Thank you, Convener. You talked a little bit in your opening statement about your vision. Professor Keating last week said he was disappointed. I'm looking for a vision of Scotland in Europe and what kind of Europe Scotland would want and what its priorities in Europe might be. I do not see that in the white paper. Would you like to comment on that?
I would dispute that. I think we do set out a vision of both why it's important to Scotland to be a member of the European Union, and secondly, how an independent Scotland could both represent its own interests well within the European Union, but also contribute to the reform of the European Union, to some of the things that are important in terms of the EU and in terms of how it operates to maximise economic growth, for example. So I think we do set out how an independent Scotland would conduct itself in both on the European and on the international stage. As I read Professor Keating's evidence last week, and apologies to him if I've misinterpreted it in any way, I detected that what he was talking about was that he thought our objective of securing the transition to independent membership on the basis of continuity of effect was, in his view, and these are not his exact words, was missing an opportunity to do things differently from the UK. But of course, when we talk about continuity of effect, we talk about making the transition to independent membership on the same terms and conditions in terms of things like the Euro and Schengen as we're currently operating in. Once Scotland is an independent member of the European Union, just like all other member states, we will be able to vigorously assert our national interest, but also contribute constructively to the future development of the European Union as an institution.
Thank you.
Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning, Deputy First Minister. Pascal Donohoe, who is the Irish Minister for Foreign and External Affairs, at a meeting I attended recently, described Ireland's relationship with the UK has been much improved because of their independent membership of the European Union and the fact that they were a small nation. Could you tell us what you see the benefits to Scotland as a relatively small nation, what the benefits to Scotland are within the European Union as a member and a family of small nations within the Union?
I think overwhelmingly the most significant benefits to Scotland of being part of the European Union come from being members of the single market and what that opens up economically for us. You know, being part of a market of 500 million people with free movement, free trade, etc. There is no doubt that protects and helps to create jobs in Scotland. You know, we have a very good record in terms of foreign direct investment. I think it is safe to say that is helped considerably by our membership of the single market. So firms outside of Europe can invest in Scotland in the knowledge that that gives them access to the single market. I think something like 40% of our foreign investment is from European member states. So clearly that is of benefit. All of that would be put at risk if we weren't a continuing member of the European Union. There's also evidence which we set out in the Scotland and the European Union background paper that we published just after the white paper, of the fact that in the way that, as we all are familiar with, the European Union operates, actually small states have a very strong influence. Small states are able to influence the direction of European policy, and the idea that big states wield all of the influence in Europe is not borne out by the evidence. So we would have the ability to forge alliances on issues that were of importance to us. I think we would work inevitably very closely in the European Union with our partners elsewhere in the UK. I mean, you know, it wouldn't be possible. I mean, a lot of the business of the European Union, particularly in the Council, is done by compromise and consensus, not by vote. But if in scenarios where it was by vote, we could never be in a worse position, because where we agree with the UK, we would vote with the UK, but where our interests diverge, unlike at the moment where we have no direct ability to put our own point of view across, we would have that ability. So we could never be worse off in that scenario. So the benefits of being in Europe for me are huge and enormous. And of course, let's not forget that for all the discussion around Scotland's independent membership of the European Union, there is actually a very real risk to our membership of the European Union if we're not independent, given the in-out referendum that David Cameron has committed to in 2017.
What does Scotland as an independent nation bring to the table? I know we've been a member for 40 years, of course, and you've said that. So what do we bring to the table additionally as an independent member of the Union that our members and partners in the Union would be attracted to and would welcome?
Well, I think we bring a number of things. I mean, obviously, we are Europe's biggest oil-producing nation, and we're one of Europe's biggest gas-producing nations. We've got substantial fishing waters. We export, you know, a lot to the rest of Europe. Food and drink exports being of particular importance. We bring some, I think, particular expertise. I mentioned, I think, in my opening statements, our expertise as a country around climate change, our expertise around energy. I think we bring that kind of particular approach to certain issues to the European table. I think we've got a particular perspective, if you look at current things, that align very closely with Europe on our efforts to tackle youth unemployment, for example. So we bring a particular perspective on the world, but we also bring expertise on a range of issues that are important in terms of the development over the next few years in the European Union's priorities. I think Scotland generally, as an independent nation, I talked about our commitment to international law, to democracy, to human rights. You know, small nations can have a big influence in the world if they are seen to be, you know, a voice for peace and justice, and I think that's what Scotland would be.
And just lastly on that theme, Convener, what are the downsides for Scotland remaining as part of the UK, being part of the European Union? What are the disadvantages to us?
Well, you know, right now, and you know, if Richard Lockhead was sitting here instead of me, he would be able to tell you a number of, or cite a number of instances where this is very real for Scotland. You know, as a part of the EU, as part of a member state of the UK as the member state, you know, we have the ability to attend Council of Ministers meetings, but we don't have the ability to speak at those meetings without the express permission of the UK government, and then only if we take the UK government line. Now, you hope that in many cases that is a line that we are comfortable with, and there is a lot of cooperation there to try and ensure that is the case. But on some issues, if there are particular Scottish interests that are not reflected in that UK government negotiating line, we don't have the formal ability to press the Scottish case, and Richard probably has more experience of that in terms of his fishing and agricultural responsibilities than any other minister in the Scottish Government. We saw very recently in terms of CAP payments, extra payments made to the UK Government by virtue of the fact that Scottish farmers have some of the lowest per hectare payments in the whole European Union. But that money not actually being made available in its entirety to Scotland. So there are very real examples of how our status at the moment doesn't permit the full and active representation of Scotland's interests. Second, and I've alluded to this already, I'm not going to labour the point, I'm just going to state it as a fact, as I think it is. If Scotland is not independent, then we face, certainly based on what David Cameron appears to be committing to, we face the very real possibility of an in-out European referendum where Scotland, as I think it would, I'm not taking that for granted, but as I think it would, vote to stay in the European Union given the benefits that accrue from that. But the UK as a whole, as I hope it wouldn't, but I think there is at least a possibility that it would vote to come out. And in that scenario, Scotland would find itself on the road out of the European Union completely against our will. And I think that would be catastrophic for our economic and national interests. And if we don't become independent, then that is a prospect that we face, and I think it's a serious one.
Thank you.
Okay, Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Deputy First Minister. If I could briefly, before asking you some questions of my own, refer back to a comment you made in relation to Gavin Brown and Gavin's line of questioning. I think it would be very helpful if you were able to provide the committee with some information about the work that's been done to check out whether other member countries would be able to conform to the timetable laid out in the white paper. I think that would be something that would be very, very useful for us to help to inform our consideration of the white paper going forward. So I wonder if you think that's something that would be possible.
I'm happy to look at what we can put together in terms of I think Gavin's particular point was about the ratification processes of other European countries. I'm happy to look at what we can put together on that for the committee.
That would be very helpful, thank you.
I think it's all public information.
I beg your pardon?
I think it will all be publicly available information.
I suspect it will be, and given the number of civil servants currently working in this particular project, I would have thought that would have been something that could have been pulled together quite easily, and I'd be surprised if it hadn't already been done, as seems to be the case. However, I wonder if you could tell the committee if the government has taken legal advice on the issue of students from other parts of Great Britain being able to access free tuition in Scotland post-independence.
I'm not going to rehearse the ministerial code issues on source and content of legal advice. You're as familiar with that as I am. The white paper is consistent with any legal advice that we've taken. On the issue of tuition fees, just to look at that issue substantively, it's well known that the Scottish Government thinks access to higher education on the ability to learn, not the ability to pay, is a very, very important principle. It was a principle that I benefited from as a young student, and I don't think I've got a right to deny that same access to education to other young people. Equally flowing from that, we don't want to be in a position where we have to charge students from the rest of the UK to access Scottish universities. It's not a position of our choosing. We're in that position because of the policy of tuition fees in the rest of the UK. And if we didn't have a position of charging students from the rest of the UK to come to university, then we would be in a position of potentially crowding our own students out of access to university. If the position in the rest of the UK was to change at any point in the future and we had a return to free access to higher education, then I'm pretty sure that position in Scotland would also change.
But we're talking post-independence.
Absolutely. Well, in post-independence, I think that position would change. If we had a position where students were no longer charged in England to go to university in England, then the reason that it exists for students from the rest of the UK being charged to go to university in Scotland would no longer be there to the same extent. So it is likely that that policy, I'm obviously speaking for the current government at the moment, but it is likely that that policy would change. It's the position around charging students from the rest of the UK has come about because of the policy in the rest of the UK. It's not something that we would have chosen to put in place had we had a completely free choice over that.
But if students in, say, Italy were charged for tuition?
Well, I mean, the White Paper lays this out. We think, and in terms of European law, we would require to make an objective justification for charging students from the rest of the UK tuition fees. We believe that can be done because of the particular circumstances of the geography of Scotland and the rest of the UK and the policy that exists in other parts of the UK, and our objectives of ensuring that we can have, the interesting thing is that since we've been charging students from the rest of the UK, we've still seen an increase in the number of students from the rest of the UK coming to Scottish universities, and we want to see that continue. But given the policy divergence north and south of the border, and given all of the circumstances that exist, if we didn't have a policy of charging students from the rest of the UK while they are still charged in the rest of the UK for university, then that would lead to, I think, unfortunate consequences for our own students accessing university education in Scotland. So that's the objective justification for that policy, and it's one we're confident of.
Well, earlier on, Deputy First Minister, you made great play of the fact that Scottish people benefit by being citizens of the EU. So too do people in the rest of the United Kingdom as it's currently constituted. So where is the legal evidence that that situation can change in an independent Scotland, bearing in mind that Universities Scotland have taken legal advice which indicates that nationality cannot be a deciding factor? Now, it seems to me that the only rationale that you have offered so far is, in fact, nationality.
Well, the legal issue turns on objective justification. That's what we set out in the White Paper. We believe that objective justification can be made. But I go back to the point I was making. We believe in free education, and we believe in free education for people regardless of their nationality. We are in the position of requiring to charge students from the rest of the UK because of the policy decisions that have been taken by Westminster governments, as is their right to do, to charge students for access to university in England. Now, we have an obligation to ensure that we have the correct balance of students in our universities in order that Scottish students can access university, and that's a policy in terms of charging students from the rest of the UK that flows from that. And in terms of your point about the legality of that, we believe that can be objectively justified.
Well, if it can't be objectively justified, then, in my view, that would be a breach of EU legislation. And if I am right and you are wrong, what would the cost to Scotland be of having to amend that particular policy?
It's not just about, I mean, I think the figures on, what it would cost for students in the rest of the UK to have free access to university in Scotland, I think in a matter of public record, I think they've been cited about £150 million or thereabouts. But this is not just an issue of cost, it is an issue about protecting appropriate access to universities for Scottish students. I think it's great that we have students from the rest of the UK coming to study in Scotland. I think it's great that we have students from the rest of the European Union and internationally coming to study in Scotland. But we also need to make sure that our students in Scotland also have good opportunities to access university in Scotland. So this policy is not just about cost, it's about ensuring our ability to retain that healthy balance of students in our universities. Now, you said if it can't be objectively justified, it would breach European law. The whole point I'm making is the compliance with European law is because it can be objectively justified, and we've laid out the reasons why we strongly believe that is the case. And I would hope that anybody who believes, as I do, in the principle of free education would get behind that position and see its common sense. Now, as I've already said, if we I'm not sure a Labour government would reverse tuition fees in the rest of the UK, but say one day we get a traditional Labour government that would return the rest of the UK to free education, then I think that position in Scotland changes. There would no longer be the same requirement and necessity to charge students from the rest of the UK to come to university in Scotland.
I understand that the Deputy First Minister really doesn't want to answer the question. But no, but the question isn't about what your policy is and why that is your policy. The question is about what the position will be if we were to be an independent Scotland and be members of the EU. You cannot discriminate against other members of the EU based on their nationality. I've heard no other rationale for discriminating against students from the rest of the UK other than the fact that they're not Scottish and that where they live there happens to be a fee payment. Now that's a matter of policy in those individual jurisdictions. That isn't a matter on which the Scottish Government may be able to opine on it, but it cannot make its legislation distinct in that sense from European law.
Well, just for the record, your last question to me was how much would it cost if you didn't charge, and I answered that question directly, as I recall. Your second, or I think your previous question to that was around on what basis can we take the position that we can charge students from the rest of the UK. And I went into some detail about the need to have an objective justification for that in terms of European law and what I considered the objective justification to be. It's not about nationality, it's about the fact that we have a set of circumstances flowing from geography and the cross-border flows of students between Scotland and the rest of the UK and the consequences for Scottish education of a policy decision taken at Westminster to charge its own students for access to university. And that raises implications for Scottish universities and that's the objective justification for the position we've taken. So, I mean, I've set out all of that. Patricia Ferguson is entitled to disagree with it, but I don't think she is entitled to say I haven't answered her question, because I have at some length.
I wasn't suggesting that you hadn't answered the question, Deputy First Minister. I was suggesting that you're providing more information than you were actually asked for, and thereby trying to prevaricate, shall we say, around those issues. But you're right, it is £150 million that would be lost to the Scottish Exchequer and to Scottish education if the current situation pertained in an independent Scotland. But presumably, in that scenario, there would be more students from the rest of the UK would come to Scotland, so the cost would be likely to be greater.
I think Patricia Ferguson is making the case for the objective justification of our policy there. Could I just say, the current situation is the one that we are proposing would continue in an independent Scotland. We're proposing a continuation of the status quo in that regard. Now, you know, I've set out what the position of an SNP government in an independent Scotland would be. It would be to make that case for objective justification, which we think is very strong. If there was a Labour government in an independent Scotland, maybe they'd be happy to charge everybody, maybe there'd be tuition fees for Scottish students as well, who knows? But I'm setting out the position of an SNP government in an independent Scotland. It's set out very clearly in the White Paper. It's based on that objective justification. It's regrettable to the extent that we don't want to see students in the rest of the UK charged to go to university anywhere in the UK, but as long as you have that policy decision of a Westminster government, that's the position we find ourselves in. So if the opposition members around the table want to lobby the UK government to change their policy, then we might all end up in a happier position.
Just before I let some members in and do supplementaries, I should probably let colleagues know, and maybe they already know this, that the Education Committee are going to look at aspects of the White Paper and specifically on international students. So maybe we should leave some of the questions for our education colleagues to do that. But I've got Claire Adamson in a supplementary and Gavin Brown after her.
Yeah, Deputy First Minister, it was just at the moment charging is determined by a residency test and is not to do with nationality. In an independent Scotland in that situation, is it not that the residency will be give primacy to this, and it won't be about nationality, it will be about the residency of the student and where they have lived within the European Union? And also, post-2017, if the UK leaves the European Union, what impact would that have on the rest of the UK students?
Well, I mean, you're right in terms of residency. Of course, if an English student is domiciled in Scotland and a resident in Scotland, then you know that is what that decision is based on. This is not about nationality, and I think it's pretty invidious for anybody to suggest that it is. This is a a practical policy solution to a problem that is not of our making, but nevertheless a problem that we can't ignore in terms of its impact on Scottish universities. If the UK leaves the European Union, I think the consequences for students in the rest of the UK, I think the consequences for the rest of the UK will be pretty severe. But you know, if we are independent, then thankfully that's a decision we can take for ourselves. If we're not independent, then, as I've already said, so I won't go into in detail, we're in danger of being taken out of the European on the coattails of that decision. And I think the implications across a whole range of sectors would be very serious indeed.
Gavin Brown.
I'm grateful. Just on the idea of objective justification, are there any existing examples where an existing EU country treats 26 other or 25 other member states in one way, but they're able to charge one member state differently from others? Does that exist anywhere in the EU at the moment?
There's no set of circumstances that are completely analogous to the circumstances we would face if Scotland becomes independent against a situation where there are tuition fees south of the border. Now, you know, Gavin Brown particularly, if he doesn't like this situation, should probably raise it with his Westminster colleagues in order to perhaps procure a change of policy in the rest of the UK.
So I was merely asking, are there existing examples?
And I answered your question.
No. Thank you.
Malik.
Thank you and good morning. First of all, I want to clarify a couple of statements that you've made. You said that Scotland would want to be part of the European Union, whereas the UK may not be. But you also said that you're not taking that for granted, but then you seem to be taking it for granted that the UK would. So which is it? Are you taking it for granted or you're not taking it for granted?
What? Sorry, I'm not sure I understand.
The electorate decision to opt in or out of the European Union.
I can't remember what I said. I'm not taking. I think I was saying that if there was an in-out European Union referendum, as in any referendum, you can't take the result for granted, is what I was saying. But I'm pretty confident, I'm very confident in fact, that in an in-out EU referendum, people in Scotland would not vote to come out of the European Union. I was simply making the point that you should never try to predict with certainty the outcome of any referendum, but I would be very surprised.
So it confused me because you said that you don't want to predict it and then you go on to predict it, and I was just wondering, so what...
It's an opinion, Hansel. I mean, right. You may take a different view, you're entitled to do so. I would be very confident that in a referendum about membership of the European Union, people in Scotland would vote to stay in the European Union because of the benefits that come from that. You know, I appreciate that people have gripes and groans and frustrations about the European Union. We all do from time to time, but I think when the chips were down, people would vote in Scotland to stay in, and you know, that's my opinion. It's an opinion I hold fairly strongly.
The other comment you made was that you didn't want to talk about embassies or how many embassies we would have around the world. And coming from Glasgow with 140 different nationalities living there, I think they would be quite worried about that statement. What did you actually mean by that?
I think you misheard my statement, so I'm happy to repeat it. I'm happy to talk about embassies. The White Paper has quite an extensive section on the number of embassies we would have, where our initial focus would be in terms of location of embassies. So I'm very happy to talk about it. I know from my own constituency experience how important that is. The point I was making in my opening statement was that our international outlook and the debate in an international context about whether or not Scotland should be an independent country is about much more than simply how many embassies you have. It's about the role Scotland could play as an independent country in the world. So I hope that clarifies the comment.
Yeah, but I can then perhaps go on by saying that in terms of the immigration policy, I mean, if our immigration policy would differ from the rest of the UK immigration policy, how would that affect our relationship at the border? Because obviously they would have a different immigration policy.
The White Paper sets out some ways in which an independent Scotland's immigration policy, if the current government was in office, would differ from the immigration policy of the rest of the UK. For example, we have been very clear that the post-study work visa, for example, was a good thing for the Scottish economy, and we would look to restore that. In terms of your point about the border, and I'm assuming you're talking about the common travel area, you know, we have a common travel area at the moment that contains, amongst other territories, the UK and Ireland. The UK and Ireland don't have identical immigration systems, and yet they still coexist within a common travel area that doesn't necessitate border controls, and that is the position that Scotland would be in, as well as a member of the common travel area. And I think that here we don't have to speculate. We've got examples through the Irish UK position there that says that that kind of scenario works very well, and there's no reason why it wouldn't do so for Scotland as well.
I think there's a natural border between us, and I think that sort of shields them a little. But anyway, I'll accept your answer on that. And I wanted to say that last week we had some experts who were very enthusiastic in their explanation how easy it would be for us to join the European Union and how easy it would be to be part of NATO. And I almost thought we need to tie them down to the chairs. They were that enthusiastic about it. But when I actually asked them if they were in a position to guarantee there would be no veto against this, a possible Scottish membership, they were not in that position to do. They said that they couldn't guarantee it. Can you guarantee a membership? And if you can't, have you made any moves to try and find out that we don't find ourselves in that position?
There isn't a single member state, including Spain. Much has been made of late of the comments of the Spanish Prime Minister, who have said or even come close to suggesting that they would veto the membership of an independent Scotland. So, what I can set out for you are the facts. There is nothing in the treaties of the European Union that allows for, in the scenario that Scotland would be in, the disapplication of the treaties or for Scottish citizens as European citizens to be deprived of their European citizenship. We have a situation where there is no member state that has even come close to hinting that they would veto Scotland's membership. There are very many reasons why it would be against the national interests of other European member states to do so. We have a situation where Scotland has been a member of the European Union and complied with all the law of the European Union for 40 years. So I can set out those facts and I can say to people, come to your own conclusion.
Can I just interrupt there? You say that, we are members of the European Union, nationals of the European Union, and we have worked with the European Union. Actually, we haven't. The British government has, not the Scottish government.
Of course, but the Scottish Government has responsibility for transposing European law into domestic law on a range of matters. The point I'm making is that Scotland, and I've said this expressly on a number of occasions in my evidence session this morning, so I'm not trying to kind of sort of use language that suggests otherwise, that we are part of Europe just now as part of the UK. I'm not denying that, but the point is we comply with the entire body of European law. We have done so for 40 years. The Scottish Government transposes European law on a regular basis into domestic law. The idea that Europe, an organisation that exists to expand and to enlarge, an organisation founded on the principles of democracy, respect for human rights, etc., is going to turn round to Scotland that has expressed a democratic desire to be independent and say we're going to put you outside the European Union. Put to one side the fact there is no legal basis on which they could do that. I think politically and in the real world the idea of that is simply incredible.
I'm sorry that if I'm pressing you on this, but in terms of actual membership, I understand that we require all of the members to agree for a membership for a new member, regardless of what the circumstances are. Is it fair to say that we don't actually have a very clear yes-no, meaning veto or no veto, for Scotland to be a new member?
Well, what we do have is the fact that not a single member state has said that they would veto. Now, I listened carefully to the comments of the Spanish Prime Minister. I think if the Spanish Prime Minister had wanted to, he was perfectly able to say that when he made these other comments a couple of weeks ago. We've actually had comments from other senior Spanish politicians saying that if the decision for Scotland to be independent was taken on an agreed consensual basis, Spain would have nothing to say about it. So I'm simply pointing out, we can, and I dare say we will, and it's legitimate, we'll have these debates right up until the referendum, but the reality, the hard fact is no member state is threatening to veto Scotland. No member state has even come close to doing that. And when you kind of look at this in a real world basis, why on earth would they? the city we both represent. You know the constituency I represent. I have constituents from many different European member states. If Scotland was suddenly to find itself outside the European Union, all of these people would suddenly have no legal right to be here. You know, the consequences of that, not just for Scotland, but for other member states and their citizens, are such that it is an incredible proposition. And, you know, I'm struck in all of these debates that, you know, when people say, but you might be vetoed, you might be this, nobody can actually put forward any evidence that suggests that is a credible proposition at all.
I'm totally accepting what you're saying in terms of no one's actually said or suggested that they would veto us. But the point that I'm making is that no one's actually suggested or guaranteed that they would all agree for the membership either. And if you'll allow me to finish, and that's the issue that's concerning me as a Scot. I don't want to find myself in no man's land. So what I'm saying is, have we done any investigatory work in which we can satisfactorily say categorically to the electorate that we are in fact guaranteed membership?
I find and I'll say this to anybody who asks it, I find the suggestion that Scotland would not be a continuing member of the European Union just, as the word I've used is incredible. I think it is inconceivable. Now, you said no member state has said, yeah, you're a man of the world, Chancellor. You know that member states will take great care not to be seen to be interfering in the Scottish referendum. It's a domestic matter for Scotland. But I do think it's significant that, you know, no member state, not even Spain, that is the member state that is frequently cited as the one that might be, you know, problematic, has come close to saying they would veto Scottish membership. Now, you said you don't want to find yourself in no man's land. I don't think there is any possibility of that if Scotland votes to be independent. I think there is a significant possibility of it in terms of European Union membership if we don't vote to be independent and we are part of the in-out referendum that will take place in 2017.
It's probably one of the most polite no answers I've had for a while. Thank you.
Just on that point, Deputy First Minister, a very interesting fact was brought to our attention at committee last week, and both Professor Keating and Professor Tierney deferred to Sir David Edward on this, and it was the issue that if there was any challenge or any contravention or any issue regarding EU citizens' rights, whether that be the rights of Scots in Scotland or the rights of any other EU national, either living or working or studying in Scotland, that the European Court of Justice would likely step in and actually ensure that the rights of those people are upheld. And I wonder whether if that's something that maybe you've thought about, and give us some government insight into that one.
I don't know whether that is the case or not. I've read with great interest, as I would suggest to anybody who's got an interest in this does, the comments of Sir David Edward. Sir David is, as far as I'm aware, not somebody who's known to be a big supporter of independence, but he's somebody with a wealth of expertise on matters of European law. And, you know, the comments he's made about the obligation on the European Union to negotiate before the point Scotland became legally independent, in good faith, the issues around Scottish membership, the points he's made about, and I'm not quoting him directly here, I'm paraphrasing about, you know, the implications of Scotland being outside the European Union. I think these are all extremely powerful points, and, you know, he is somebody, I think, of all of the people who've commented in this debate, whose credentials in terms of knowing what he's talking about are unimpeachable.
Okay, I'm going to sort of open another front-end question in the aspect of some of the other aspects in the white paper that have a bearing on this committee. One is obviously international and foreign policy, and an issue that will come of no surprise to you is the issue that I have pursued in my political career and my professional career, is the rights of people seeking sanctuary in Scotland, and our responsibility to people seeking sanctuary in Scotland. And I do welcome one of the best things I read in the white paper was the proposal to close Dungavel and not to downraid vulnerable families for the very notion that they had the cheek to seek sanctuary in Scotland. And I wonder if you could maybe give us a wee insight into that, because obviously that has an impact on, you know, whether Scotland's upholding the EU standard as far as looking after people seeking sanctuary, but also how Scotland would maybe do it a bit differently.
Well, I believe, and I'm pretty sure everybody around the table believes this. I'm not suggesting any kind of monopoly on the part of the Scottish Government here. I think we've got an obligation to treat people fleeing torture or fleeing persecution elsewhere in the world and seeking asylum here. I think we've got an obligation to treat them with dignity and humanity. What we set out in the White Paper is how an independent Scotland would go about that. We would have the opportunity to put in place a new model of asylum services that were separate from immigration services. We propose a Scottish Asylum Agency would oversee asylum applications. That process has to be humane, as I've said. It also has to be robust. People have to have confidence in it. We would work hard to continue to promote the integration of refugees and asylum seekers from the day they arrive in Scotland, not just from the point at which they are granted leave to remain. We would take the opportunity to close Dungavel. We would end the practice of dawn raids. I think the practice of dawn raids is a inhumane practice, particularly where children and vulnerable people are involved. Clearly, if a failed asylum seeker is a risk to the public, there would be the ability to provide secure accommodation there while steps are taken to remove them. But if there is a need for forcible removals, that has to be done humanely. So, we have to have a robust process in place for processing asylum applications, but that robust process has to be a humane process. And I think we have seen over recent years, particularly around the practice of dawn raids, the process in the UK sometimes falling short of that obligation.
Okay, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. Deputy First Minister, we took quite significant evidence for the Commissioner, European Commissioner on human trafficking. And obviously human trafficking has become a significant area of concern across Europe and in the UK. Scotland has made its views on this very clear, and the White Paper gives us a way forward in terms of how we would deal with people seeking asylum. But do you have any concerns about how we'd be able to tackle trafficking if the UK comes out of the European Union in 2017, as this a very real problem in our country?
I mean, I'm not going to repeat myself. I think the UK coming out of the EU would have all sorts of very unfortunate consequences for the UK as a whole, and if we were still part of that for Scotland. I think on human trafficking, I think what I would stress here is the need for all of us to work cooperatively, not just across the UK, whether or not Scotland is independent, and across Europe and internationally, to do everything that we can to combat what is a horrendous practice of human trafficking with horrendous implications for the people who are trafficked. And, as a Scottish Government right now, with our current responsibilities, we seek to, prioritise what we are able to do to be part of the global response to human trafficking. And, it's one of many areas where close continued cooperation with our partners in the rest of the UK and across Europe would be, vitally important.
Professor Keating last week gave us some examples of why a hole in the European Union would be so damaging to the rest of the European Union and the countries involved. Is trafficking one of those areas that if Scotland was left outside the European Union in this hypothetical situation, is another area where there's very real cooperative working practices across Europe? It would be so damaging for that not to be there.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is undoubtedly the case. I mean, I don't think there is any possibility of Scotland being left out of the European Union in the independence scenario. But that's one of many examples why it's in nobody's interest for that to be the case. And, as we all know, we'll all debate this issue passionately over the next few months, but we all know that, pretty hard-headed issues come to the fore when these things are being negotiated, and it's in nobody's interest for Scotland not to be a continuing member of the European Union, economically, socially, culturally, in terms of citizenship, the issues you're talking about in terms of human trafficking. What is in the interest of Scotland and in the interest of every other member state of the European Union is for Scotland to continue to be a member and to play an ongoing, close, cooperative, constructive part as part of the European Union.
Thanks again, Convener. Deputy First Minister, could I ask a question relating to broadcasting? In independent Ireland, you can switch on your telly and you can watch your favourite TV programmes like EastEnders and Doctor Who and Strictly Come Dancing. In an independent Scotland, will you be able to do the same?
Yes.
Thank you for that. Scotland's role, Scotland's public service broadcaster post-independence will be known as the Scottish Broadcasting Service, I think. What role do you see that playing in a European context in terms of presenting the European dimension to the Scottish population, perhaps directly, and presenting Scotland's image to our European partners through our own public service broadcaster?
I mean, I think that would be a positive thing. I mean, I should say, as a Borgen fan, I think the BBC is doing quite well in presenting Europe to Scotland at the moment. But, you know, having a Scottish broadcasting service with the relationship we set out in the white paper with the BBC would allow our public service broadcasting in Scotland to do a number of things, present Scotland well and properly to Scotland and to the world, make sure that we have a window on international affairs. You know, we've had a long-running debate in Scotland about a Scottish Six, the ability to, you know, have international affairs reported through that prism. You know, we set out in the white paper how such an arrangement would work. We set out how it would be funded. I think continuing to ensure that we have free-to-view services like that is incredibly important. So, you know, it's one of the many areas where, you know, I think we see the ability of Scotland to take decisions that are in our interest, but also enable us to work cooperatively with partners elsewhere.
Rod Campbell.
Deputy First Minister, Professor Keating last week said remaining outside Schengen and in the single travel area would be a lot easier to negotiate than getting into Schengen. Any comments on that?
I mean, I think he was making the point, which is, you know, is a sensible point to make, is like Schengen and the similar point can be made about the euro. These are things that countries have to fulfil certain criteria and conditions to be eligible to be members of. We've made it very clear that we would not seek to be part of the euro. We've made it very clear we would not seek to be part of Schengen. That's part of what we argue is continuity of effect. We're not arguing for special terms. We're not arguing for terms that we don't currently enjoy as a part of the UK. We want to continue the current terms and conditions. In terms of the Schengen common travel area debate, you know, I just think it makes very strong common sense for Scotland to remain within the common travel area. And I also don't think that there are any grounds in which the rest of Europe would take a different view, because in order, if the rest of Europe was to try to force Scotland into Schengen, and, you know, let's put to one side the fact that there are all sorts of things that countries have to do to be permitted to these kind of arrangements, for the European Union to try to force Scotland into Schengen would be to create borders where none exist at the moment. Now, the European Union is an organisation that in its entire existence has worked to bring down borders, not to put borders up where none exist. So the common travel area proposal that we put forward is a strong one. It's a common sense one. I've already spoken in response to Hansel Malik about the example of UK and Ireland, meaning that, you know, there can be differences in immigration policy that exist within that.
Deputy First Minister, we took some evidence last week from Colin Fleming on defence aspects in an independent Scotland, and he had some very clear understanding of, you know, membership in international organisations, but also about the timetable for removal of Trident missiles from Faslane. And we wonder if you could just expand on that a wee bit to give us some insight into the government's thinking on that.
Well, again, I mean, I think our position on Trident is well known. We want to see Trident removed from Scotland. We want that to be as quickly as possible. We set out you know, the detail of that in the white paper. We don't think that conflicts with an independent Scotland being a member of NATO. The vast majority of members of NATO are non-nuclear countries. There are very good and strong reasons why an independent Scotland should be a member of NATO, and why NATO would benefit from an independent Scotland being a member, given our strategic position in the North Atlantic. I mean, the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation would presumably want one of the major countries in the North Atlantic to be a member of it. So, you know, that is the position we've set out. Clearly, The removal of Trident in terms of the detail of that will require to be negotiated with the Westminster Government. We've said we want that to be as quickly as is safely possible for that to happen. CND have published some reports in the past about what they consider to be a reasonable timescale for the safe removal of Trident, so we'll negotiate that, but there is no doubt we want to see Trident removed as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you very much. Gavin Brown.
It's on a separate area, Convener, if that's...
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah.
Deputy First Minister, you talked about the euro in your... you mentioned the euro in your answer, I think, to Roderick Campbell. Your position, I think, as I read it, is that you obviously wouldn't be wanting to join the euro. Is it your view that the Scottish Government would be given a formal opt-out or a de facto opt-out?
We have argued, as you will know because you've read the white paper, continuity of effect. So what we're saying is the same position as currently exists with the UK would continue to exist with Scotland, which the UK has that formal opt-out. But we also go on to make the point that regardless of whether you have a formal opt-out or not, it is not possible to force a country into the euro against its will. And Sweden is the living example of that. The requirements for euro membership include requirements that are entirely voluntary for member states to comply with.
Do you think it's likely that we'd be given a formal opt-out as opposed to a de facto opt-out?
I think the argument for continuity of effect is a very strong one. If we were in a position of, say, I'm asking people to kind of imagine a scenario that doesn't exist just now. If the UK was a member of the euro and we were saying, when Scotland becomes independent, we want to come out of the euro, that I think would be a different and more difficult scenario to argue, because you'd essentially be changing the terms of the relationship between the people of Scotland and the European Union pretty fundamentally. That's not the position we're arguing. We're not in the euro right now, and we're arguing that the same provisions that apply to us as part of the UK would continue to apply to us as an independent country. That's what we mean by continuity of effect. So you're asking me, do I think that is a likely outcome? Yes, I do. I think because it is based on the prevailing circumstances. But we go on to make the point, and I don't think this can be gainsaid by anybody, is that you cannot be forced into the euro, because one of the criteria for euro membership, the membership of the ERM for 2 years, is entirely voluntary. So in a sense, whether you have a formal opt-out or, to use your language, it's not necessarily language I would use, a de facto opt-out, the end result is the same. Scotland will not be in the euro.
I do feel there's an important difference between the two, but you've quoted a number of experts over the course of this morning who feel that we would be in the European Union. Do any of those experts, or has anyone else, backed up your claim that we would get a formal opt-out?
I can double-check what other people have said and come back to the committee on that. But I equally, again, it's... And I'm not trying to dodge your question here. There has been, to my knowledge, nobody who has argued seriously that Scotland can be forced into the euro. So we can have these kind of dancing on the head of a pin debates, or we can confront reality head on. And the reality head on is that Scotland won't be in the euro because Scotland can't be forced into the euro. And that's the position that is as plain as the nose in your face.
I say gently to you that whether we get a formal opt-out or not, I don't think is dancing on the head of a pin. I think it's quite critical. You shouldn't be so frivolous about it.
With the greatest respect to you, Gavin, and I'm trying to answer your questions here as bluntly as I can. I've set out very clearly what we mean by continuity of effect, which is arguing the position that the current arrangements that apply to the UK would continue to apply to Scotland. I simply went on to make the point that even without, to use your terminology, a formal opt-out, the end result would still be that Scotland would not be in the euro. And actually, for people, I would suggest, for people out there considering these issues just now in terms of weighing up how to vote, it's the actual position of whether Scotland would be in the euro or not that matters to them. And there is no way of cutting this debate that gets you to a position that Scotland would be forced into the euro.
Well, if you have a formal opt-out, you never have to join the euro. If you have a de facto opt-out, in the case of Sweden, you have to give a commitment that ultimately you will join the euro. That's the fundamental difference.
Well, I've already said that we would be operating on the basis of continuity of effect, so that sets out what we consider the position to be. But, you know, there is nobody, I believe there is nobody that thinks that Sweden will be joining the euro at any time in the foreseeable future. I think it was David Cameron that made the point there are some countries that have formal opt-outs and there are other countries that have, you know, no likelihood of joining the euro. Sweden is in that category. That's accepted across the European Union, that Sweden, because Sweden has chosen not to be in the euro, will not be in the euro. And it simply makes the point that, you know, whether or not you have a de facto opt-out, the end result for the country is that we would not be in the euro because we can't be forced into the euro. But in terms of your specific question, I've set out very clearly, as the white paper does, our position in terms of the continuity of effect argument.
Can I close, Amber, just requesting that you supply to us the list and quotes of people or experts who have said that we would get a formal opt-out?
Okay, I'll look forward to receiving your list of people who've said we'll be forced into the euro as well.
We're quickly running out of time, and I've got Patricia Ferguson next and a number of other members. Patricia.
Thank you, Convener. Deputy First Minister, you've stated that we're going to be still part of the common travel arrangement. We're not going to have the euro, and all of the other opt-outs that the UK has negotiated will apply to Scotland. But being able to assert that really does, at the end of the day, come down to which method of accession is appropriate for Scotland. So it all really comes down to whether or not the Article 48 route is the route that will apply. And while I would accept that no member country has said they would use a veto, I wonder whether the Scottish Government has actually spoken to any of those countries to see whether or not it would agree that Article 48, for some reason I want to call it Section 48, but Article 48 would be the correct route to follow.
Can I just... Sorry to interrupt. I actually don't agree with the premise of your question, just as an aside, that what terms an independent Scotland would make its transition to independent membership would depend on the route you took. I mean, say, and it's not what I argue, say, for example, you were using Article 49, that in no way, shape or form would that preclude Scotland becoming an independent member on the basis of continuity of effect. So I don't think it is the case that, you know, what I'm arguing in terms of continuity of effect depends on Article 48 being the route. We set out Article 48 because we think that is the most valid and sensible route to take in the absence of anything in the treaties that actually deals with the precise scenario that we're talking about. In terms of your question about discussions with other member states, we have discussions with representatives of other member states on a range of issues all of the time. The External Affairs Secretary briefed ambassadors and consuls on the contents of the white paper shortly after its publication. I'm not going to go into the detail of all of that. Equally, other member states will rightly be very careful about not unduly interfering in what is a domestic debate and decision for Scotland. But you know, we're going back over old ground here. No country has said they would veto Scotland, and it would be in no country's interests overall to veto Scotland's membership of the European Union.
I'm really not talking about a veto, though. I'm talking about the way in which Scotland might join. And there is a huge difference of opinion within the EU about what that route should be. Very many of the people I speak to in the European Union think that actually it would be Article 49 that would apply. Now, if it was Article 39, I think it would be very much harder, not necessarily impossible, but it would be very much harder for an independent Scotland to negotiate all of these opt-outs remaining, because the whole basis of the discussion would be very, very different. And what I was really asking was, have you had those kinds of discussions with those member countries that lead you to believe that they would back Scotland in going down the Article 48 route?
It goes back to a question I was asked earlier on. I mean, the Commission has said that it will give its own legal opinion in response to a request from a member state. Now, you know, that would be the appropriate... If we want to test the European Union's view on Article 48 or whether there would be another valid route for Scotland to take, then that would be the way to do it. So, you know, I'm happy to do that, but I need the UK government to, as the member state right now, to agree to ask for that opinion.
But you haven't asked individual member
Look,
states.
we have discussions with member states all of the time. We set out in the white paper that ultimately it will be for the European Union to determine what is the correct route to take. There's a range of experts that make the point that Europe will, if the political will is there, they will find the best and easiest and quickest legal route to take, and that's what will happen. But the idea again that Scotland is going to be excluded from the European Union for technical, political or any other reasons is just one that doesn't have any. And maybe we end up in these highly technical, and sometimes it does feel like dancing in the head of a pin arguments from the opposition, because they know that the central premise here about Scotland's continuing membership is such an overwhelmingly strong one.
With all due respect, Deputy First Minister, no one is saying that Scotland will not be a member of the EU. But what you said yourself was that at the end of the day it comes down to political will. And I am asking, has the Scottish Government begun to discuss with other member countries whether that political will exists?
Well,
it's quite a straightforward question.
I've already said we discussed...
Well, you've said you've discussed many things, but you haven't specifically said whether you've discussed that. And if so, what the answer has been.
Well, I've actually said that we discuss a range of things, and I also said that Fiona Hislop had briefed member states on the contents of the white paper. So by definition, these issues are part of discussions we have. I'm not going to go into the detail of private discussions between Scotland and other member states. Other member states respect that this is a democratic decision for Scotland to make. But equally, I've heard nothing from any member state at any point that would suggest other than Scotland will be welcome as a continuing member state of the European Union. And that's the bottom line, and that's the reality that I think people on the other side of this debate struggle to get round.
My question was about the route, and from what you've told us, you've not had an opinion one way or another on that from any member state.
I've already told you the correct way to get a legal opinion on the route is to ask the Commission for one. I want to ask the Commission for a legal opinion on the route, but the member state, which is the UK, has to do so. So, if the members of the parties, opposition parties here today want to join with me in asking the UK government to join with us and ask for that opinion, then that would seem to be a pretty constructive and productive way forward. I can only speculate on why the UK government doesn't want to get that opinion. Perhaps they think such an opinion wouldn't suit their purposes. I don't know, but I can only speculate.
Okay, Rod Campbell.
Just following on from that, Deputy First Minister, what difficulties does the UK government's no pre-negotiations position cause? What difficulties does the UK government's no pre-negotiations cause?
I think the UK government frequently says that they want as much clarity as possible. Well, we all want as much clarity as possible, and the White Paper provides clarity on a whole range of different issues. But, if you take the European... I think what we set out in the European Union and our route to membership is robust, valid and I think very, very strong. But if we want to know what the European Commission thinks of it, then the best thing to do is ask. But they've made clear they will only respond to that request if it comes from a member state. So, the UK government can't have it both ways. They can't say we want to know what the European Commission thinks, we want clarity on that, but we're not prepared to do what is required in order to get that. I think that's a pretty unsustainable position for them to be in. I hope it changes, and I'll be the first to welcome a change in position from them if that happens.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other members? Claire Adamson?
If Deputy First Minister, go back to where we started with all this and the Edinburgh Agreement. Obviously, the Scottish people overwhelmingly voted for the SNP on a manifesto of setting out the independence referendum. And given that the Edinburgh Agreement puts an onus on both governments to act in the best interest of the Scottish people, is there not a considerable amount of pressure, if the Scottish people want to answer this question, that the UK government should just go to the Commission and get this clarified?
Yeah, I think it would be the right thing to do. And as I said earlier on, I can only speculate as to why they won't do it. I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to go to the Commission and say, here's our precise scenario, which is what they've asked for. Give us your view on it. But that can only happen if the UK government asks for it. Maybe if they really thought it was flawed and all the rest of it, they would be keen to ask for that opinion. The fact that they are not suggests that they perhaps know it's a strong one.
Just very quickly, Deputy First Minister, we touched on earlier about the value of Scotland being part of other institutions across Europe and the world. And one of the things that jumps out is the UN and obviously the Nordic Council and the Arctic. I can't quite remember the name of the organisation for that part, but one of the things that you touched on earlier was in defence, but also in climate change and protecting that whole part of the world, especially round about, some of the arguments we have in this committee is about fish, is always about fish, and just, being sort of strategically in geography being part of that North Atlantic, as you said, but, the greater impact that would have in sort of other organisations. But specifically, I think my interest is about the UN and adhering to some of the UN standards for how people are treated and rights are upheld.
Yeah, this week I launched with the Scottish Human Rights Commission the new action plan on human rights for Scotland, which is a very impressive document. And I made the point at that launch that while we've all got an obligation to, within our current responsibilities, to promote and protect human rights, there's a real opportunity for Scotland, if we're independent, partly in the context of drawing up a written constitution, to assert very clearly and very strongly our commitment to human rights, the European Convention on Human Rights being the obvious example already incorporated through the Scotland Act, but able to be incorporated in a written constitution. But there would be a debate we could have in Scotland about whether there are other UN human rights standards that we would also want to see reflected in that constitution. That would be a debate and a decision for Scotland as a whole, not just for the government, but it's one that I think would be a very positive one.
Touched on a human rights-based constitution for an independent Scotland. Is that something we've taken a bit of evidence in this committee before about how Iceland have used a crisis situation to develop a new social contract with the people in Iceland and develop a constitution? I know the First Minister has said that a final constitution should be written by the people of Scotland and not by whatever government has of the day, but we've sort of set a standard and a framework for that constitution. Would you maybe expand just finally on that?
I think we set out in the white paper some examples of participative processes of developing constitution. I think we do mention the Iceland example. I think we mention Ireland as well, which has gone through a similar process recently. We're one of the only countries, or one of the few countries in the world, I think we might be the only country in Europe that doesn't have a written constitution. Now, I know there's, I'm a lawyer by background, I know there's debates about the pros and cons of written constitutions, but I think it's a good opportunity. It would be a good opportunity if we were independent to go through that process of developing a written constitution, setting out the rights of citizens, the relationship between citizens and the state, and protecting some very important rights. Now, what we've done as a government is give our view on some of the possible things that could be in a constitution. I think it's important we don't go too far down that road, because a constitution should not be the property of a government. It should be the property of the people of a country, which is why the participative process of drawing it up would almost be as important as the eventual document itself.
Deputy First Minister, can I thank you for giving evidence to our committee today. We've obviously knocked about quite a lot of ideas here, and the first inquiry that we're focusing on is Scotland's place in Europe, and you've given us some avenues to search down in that respect. So we thank you very much, and if there is any additional information that you could provide to the committee to help us along the way, that would be very gratefully received. Thank you very much. I'm going to suspend for 5 minutes to allow just a changeover. Okay, welcome back to the European and External Relations Committee. Moving on to agenda item 3. The next agenda item is to consider 2 reports from the Scottish Government, one on Horizon 2020 and one on the Scottish Government's response to this committee's foreign languages and primary skills inquiry. And I think, Claire, have you got something quickly to say on
the foreign languages?
Yep.
Well, I thought the foreign language response was very interesting, but I think what I took from it was that it would definitely moving from a sort of in principle stage in this to a rollout and implementation phase. So I know it's under consideration under we haven't confirmed our work programme in the Education and Culture Committee, but I do think it's now, it would be good if this committee handed it over, because I think the whole European context of it, if you like, has moved on to the education and implementation side.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments on either Horizon 2020 or foreign languages? Patricia.
I think Claire's probably got a point about the foreign languages element of it, convener. But I would suggest that perhaps we would want to keep a bit of an overview on it. So I don't know whether it would be possible for this committee to have a rapporteur to the Education Committee, or am I right in thinking that perhaps some of our colleagues are actually already on both committees and therefore might be able to do that without too much extra
Claire is
work?
the rapporteur of the European
I see, right,
that
sorry, I didn't realise that. Sorry, Claire. Well, that makes perfect sense then, if we could do it that way.
Yeah, and I think built into the inquiry recommendations was, you know, the function to have an update from the Scottish Government on the progress. So that's something we can always ask for when we get our 6 monthly updates from the Scottish Government to see how it's progressing. Anything on the Horizon 2020, given that was a huge piece of work for this committee, and we had a very, very successful conference on the matter as well. It's very familiar now. When I read the paper, the whole process seemed very, very familiar to me. I was keen to note, actually, that one of the things that came out from the Horizon 2020 inquiry was how do we engage many, many more small and medium enterprises. And I was surprised to see the amount of money that had actually went to small and medium enterprises, and maybe you know, there's a bit of work there to maintain that, sustain it, and actually to grow it as well. So that was really just my comment on what small and medium enterprises got from FP7, and hopefully what they can expect, you know, from Horizon 2020 being the successor. Patricia.
Yeah, on the same issue, I was interested in the innovation voucher scheme, which seemed to me to make sense. But I think what would be interesting going forward, and it maybe we'll get this as a matter of course, would be to see how many of those companies went on to successfully get money as a result of the sort of seed corn that they've had through the voucher, but also what level of funding they got, you know, to see how much that £5,000 is actually levering back in. So it would be interesting just to follow that through and to see what difference it actually makes to the individual businesses as well. You know, getting the money is one thing, but what you do with it is quite different.
With some case studies. I think, again, when we put our recommendations to the Scottish Government, again, this would become part of our 6 monthly update and the progress of this as well. We want to keep a very close eye on it. And I think it was some comments we had from Anne, the European Chief Scientific Officer. Oh, her name, Anne Glover. She had suggested, you know, there was great opportunities in Europe that maybe we weren't tapping into, and one of the things that this committee has tried to push is to make sure that the Scottish Government is looking at every single avenue where we can secure funding, especially for research and innovation, where we seem to be, you know, doing pretty well, but we could do better.
I think there was some really interesting press articles from Anne Glover, like week past on Sunday,
that,
and I've drawn that to attention of clerks. Hopefully that will maybe appear in our committee papers at future.
Okay. Okay. Any other comments on these Scottish Government reports? Just keep the finger on the pulse and keep pushing for updates.
Apologies, I've just realised. Convener, I've drawn it to the attention of the Education and Culture clerks. I didn't draw it to the attention of the clerks of this committee, but I think it's going. It should appear in the Education and Culture Committee papers at some point.
Maybe if you can share that with this committee, that would be great. Okay, moving on to agenda item 4, which is a report on the Committee of the Regions, and I'll hand over to you, Patricia.
Thanks very much, Convener. And can I just say, firstly, apologies, I've just noticed a mistake. In the letter that I sent to you in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th paragraph down, I said that my first core plenary was in January 2012. It was actually 2013. So apologies for that, but yeah, it's one of those things. I'd mentioned 2012 earlier. I think, other than to just say to members if there's any information they would want arising from any of the discussions that have been ongoing, then I'm happy to either get that information for them or provide them with a link to where it's contained. But I think what I hadn't appreciated going on to the Committee of the Regions, I was conscious of the fact that it took an inordinate amount of time to actually get the membership agreed. And that seems to be a common problem, at least amongst the UK delegation. I'm not sure whether it is internationally. But what I hadn't appreciated was quite how labyrinthine the whole thing actually is. And it really does need there to be someone who's been there before. I would hate to think what I'd have been like and how I'd have struggled if Stuart Maxwell hadn't already been there and was very familiar with the structures, and some other colleagues that I met along the way too, because it really was very difficult. But you do get your head around it quite quickly once you're there, I think is the important thing to say. So I wouldn't want to put off other colleagues who might want to do this in future years from doing it, because it is very, very interesting. And amongst the interesting things, I think, are the developing relationship that we are having with our colleagues in COSLA on shared issues and issues where we have a common perspective. That relationship's always been there, but I think it's fair to say that it's getting better, and we're now meeting regularly. We share information, we share briefings, that kind of thing. And equally with the LGA too, we get some very helpful information from them and some support and background. But I think it's fair to say that the workload of the Committee of the Regions overall is really, really big. And I doubt very much whether any two delegates from a country as we are, from this Parliament, could really know everything that's going on in the Committee of the Regions, no matter how hard we might try. But what I would also say is that actually the documentation for the Committee of the Regions is very easily accessible to anyone who wants to see it through their web portal. And again, I'd be happy to provide that information to colleagues if it was helpful to them. And I would encourage colleagues, if they've got an interest in any of the subjects that are coming up, to let Stuart or I know, so that we can reflect on that when we're having the discussions. But it's been a fascinating X number of months now on the Committee of the Regions, and I'm finding it very, very interesting, and I'm finding, apart from anything else, that I'm learning a huge amount every day almost that I'm at a meeting. And some of the smaller meetings are even more interesting than the great big plenary, as you can imagine.
I can see just from the calendar of events how diverse and absolutely fascinating some of the subjects are, and I think you're absolutely right. And you mentioned there about if there's issues coming up, is there any way of, and this might just be completely unsurmountable, but of some forward plan of some of the issues that are coming up that maybe we can take a look at before, rather than responding, that we could...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think all of the commissions, certainly the commissions I'm involved in, all have forward work plans. So we tend to know roughly in advance what kind of issues are coming up. So I'll have a check, and if I can provide that, I'll pass that on to the clerks.
Yes. And I'm pleased to hear about the better working relationship with COSLA. As convener, I had a meeting with David O'Neill a few weeks ago, who was seeking for much closer working relationship with this committee, as well as the work that they're doing in the Committee of Regions. I think there's a realisation, that if we've got many heads, in and about the structures and the labyrinth, as you put it, of Europe, then that can only help us. And I think we're doing a bit of work in how we can work a bit closer with COSLA and David O'Neill in particular as the President in this committee. So look forward to that. Any other comments or questions about Willie?
Thanks, Convener. I just wondered if, Patricia, if there was any discussion about the whole broadband agenda. I see it was in the July plenary there. At previous committees here, myself and Jamie McGregor have raised the issue about the big cut to the IT infrastructure fund. I think it's down from 9 billion to 1 billion. We've raised it several times. 9 billion to 1 billion euro to provide IT infrastructure support throughout Europe. So I see if the Committee of the Regions was touching on that issue about deployment of broadband. Were they aware of that, and had they developed any particular view about how to assist there? Because it's a huge cut.
Yeah, I'll take back the papers and provide the final opinion too. Willie, I don't recall that being a particular issue that we discussed. I think perhaps because the budget of £9 billion was never actually there. It was a proposal. So we might have actually discussed the actual budget, but not the proposed budget, if you see what I mean. But I think it was more about how you go about simplifying it and making it easier to cut the costs from that sort of point of view. But I'll certainly get the opinion and pass it on to William for his interest.
Super.
Hanzala.
I recall a conversation in which I had suggested that the Scottish Government was employing somebody to assist in that process as well, and I had suggested that we ask them to look into other pots of or streams of either money or money in kind to assist in that process. Have we taken any steps towards identifying the person and seeing if they can assist us in that process? Or not yet? I think it's a not yet. It's a not yet, isn't it?
It's a not yet.
Yeah. Okay. Can we do it, please? Because this isn't our last meeting this session, is it? It is, and we don't have a next meeting after the recess as well. The first no, that's another.
9th of January we've got
yes.
a work programme meeting, so we can maybe have a conversation then about how we take forward our inquiries about
That would be very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Any more? Patricia, thank you very much. I think you've given us a really good insight. It's good, you know, a Committee of the Regions person being a member of the committee for the time being, and that's very helpful. But a wee forward plan, I think, would give us, you know, some ideas on where we go. Okay, agenda item 5 is the Brussels Bulletin. And questions, comments? There's a section in the Brussels Bulletin about Horizon 2020 and the progress it's making as well. So just to draw that to your attention and how they're splitting up the funds. Willie.
Thanks, Convener. There's a wee section there on page 6 under the heading of Education, Youth, Culture, Sport and Sport Council. Sorry, it talks about new digital learning tools such as open education resources. Now, I know there's not a lot of detail there, but it chimes with some of the work and thinking that we've been doing on GLOW, which is the Scottish kind of version of the same, a kind of open access framework for education, and the redevelopment of that, as we know, is taking place. I suppose it was just to alert the committee to maybe keep a wee eye on what these open education resource tools are in a European context. Maybe there's other technical solutions out there that might offer these kinds of services and interactions for pupils and parents in their learning environment. So it's just to keep an eye on it, I think.
Certainly when we undertook the foreign languages in primary schools inquiry, some of the schools we went into had links with other schools across Europe, and they would send each other letters and emails and participate in lessons together across the internet, which to see some of the smaller kids at 5 and 6, you know, who were just whiz kids, and communicating by Skype with you know, other kids in other countries was very beneficial. So yeah, absolutely, all of these things I think just, you know, give added value. Rod?
No, what I was going to say is I'm quite ignorant, I'm afraid. I didn't really understand very much about the emissions trading scheme. It would be helpful if someone who compiled the bulletin could perhaps give us a wee bit more information on that scheme rather than just the proposals, the agreement now reached, and how the schemes actually operate.
But can I suggest that we check with the rural climate change clerks, because I think maybe there's something that that committee were doing on this, so we might not be able to need to go very far to get some information on this. Yeah. Claire?
A different area of the bulletin, if that's okay, Ken. Yeah, I was just really interested in, I suppose this does take us back to the languages inquiry that we did about the Erasmus Plus rollout, and that the implementation of the Erasmus programme, Erasmus Plus in the UK, will primarily be the British Council and ECORIS. I've got that one right. And I think it's it would be really interesting to see specifically in the area of foreign language assistance, how we might feed into that, how the requirements for Scotland in terms of rolling out the languages is actually feeding in, and what the British, because I know they had concerns about the drop in AFLEs, and I know that there's only a few councils in Scotland now using AFLEs, but that might become quite important in terms of rollout of the languages. So it's quite.
Will we write to the British Council and ask for a wee update on where they are, because they had said they were making progress as well? Jenny's just telling me they covered it in the very recent update that they gave us, so maybe we should go and have a wee look back and see what we've got, and then we can take it from there.
Given the comments that have already been made about integration with COSLA as well, I think this is really, really important that information is shared with the partners.
Okay. Well, let's have a wee check and see what the recent updates are and see where we can go from there. Anything else? Happy to recommend the Advisory Bulletin to other subject committees, raising particular attention to the emissions stuff to the Rural Committee? Yeah?
Yep.
Happy to do that? Excellent, thank you very much. And on that, we move into private session. And I thank you all for coming along.